How are you?
Good.
Awesome. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Cool. So before we begin, I'll go ahead and give a little bit of a preface as to what we'll be doing today, and then we'll be able to hop into it. So it's going to be about a 50-minute interview. We'll go right up until we have about 10 minutes left, and then I'll try to give you some initial feedback at that point, just so you have something coming away from this. And then also give you a little bit of space to ask any questions you might have for me. As far as the interview itself, it's going to be a coding interview in HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. You'll be welcome to use any JavaScript framework you want, but you will have to implement it yourself. So if you could go ahead and open that up and also share your screen. Awesome. So with all that said, I'll go ahead and explain the prompt. So essentially what we're going to be looking to design here today is going to be two components. So one on the left, you have a 3x3 grid of squares with a single highlighted cell that's going to default to the top left being highlighted. And then to the side on the right, you see another box component that's going to have 4 orthogonally placed arrows that are going to be able to control the highlighted square to move in the 4 cardinal directions. And you'll also note that the walls will be respected. So in this case, if you clicked that up arrow or the left arrow, nothing would happen. If you clicked the right or the down arrow, it would move in the appropriate direction.
Gotcha.
And
okay.
yeah, that's about it. Feel free to ask any questions and try to match the styling as well as you can, but the styling is secondary to the functionality.
Okay. Gotcha. Sounds good. Okay. So just restating the problem here, it's going to be 2 different components here. And this grid, we want it to be 3x3 grid, right? There's not going to be any need to expand that for any reason. It's just will always be a 3x3 grid.
For this will just be a 3x3.
Okay, gotcha. And then for this block here, are we wanting it to click just exactly on the arrows, or just or more just like if like click here in this like square, like that's
We'll just say clicking on the arrows themselves.
Okay, great. Okay, I think that makes sense. And you said that it's bound, so if I click left here, it doesn't go out, nothing happens. If I click left and I'm on one of these, up and I'm one of these, right, I'm one of these, etc. Right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to take a look here at this code pen. Sometimes I like to create a different little thing here so I can kind of look at my design while I'm going. So great. What I am kind of thinking here for a game plan, I think I'll probably just go with I'll just use a plain JavaScript
Sure.
for it. Is there anything in this HTML that we need, or is this boilerplate?
It's all boilerplate.
Okay, great. So I think I'll probably go ahead and just get rid of this, the body stuff here.
Makes sense.
Okay. So that we don't have this, like, at least this example HTML squares go here stuff. Okay. So, whoops, I guess we're going to look at the definition of that. Okay. So, kind of what I'm thinking here, just to kind of have a game plan, is so 2 components. For the first one, it's like the grid. I mean, we could break this down in a couple different components, but I'm thinking what I'll do is just have one grid component to start, and I'm thinking what I'll probably do is create the grid, like the basic grid layout in HTML. And I'm thinking about this, like, so as we click the different buttons, I'm thinking kind of what will happen is, like, as we click, we'll have a handler that like knows where the current like I guess, or like which grid is currently selected. Oops. Adds a removes a CSS selector that changes the color of that grid, like maybe like a dot selected, and adds the CSS selector to the appropriate grid placement. So we're going to have some interaction, obviously, between these two components. Okay. And then that handler will be on this here. Okay. So in our body here, let's maybe create a div component that will be like our outer container for the grid. And I like to use like data component so that we kind of know that this is more for like JavaScript.
Makes sense.
All this like grid. And then we can use this to select things as needed. And within our grid here, I mean, there's a couple ways we could maybe accomplish this. We could dynamically create like grid squares using JavaScript to append here, but maybe that might maybe that might be overkill. So I'm thinking maybe I'll create more of that just here in HTML, and maybe we can refactor later if that ends up being more trouble than it's worth. But I guess before I move on to that, does this kind of game plan seem like a good way to go for you? Are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense.
Okay.
I think the approach of having a selector that'll actually, or a selected class in CSS is your base sort of mechanism of selecting, and then determining which one we're going to establish via handler seems totally reasonable.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, that sounds good. So, so we have our grid here, and then so we can also. So now I'm thinking, how are we going to create like our rows here? So one way we can do this as well is create another inner div here, maybe for the row here, and we can add maybe a class here to be row. Let's expand this so we can actually see a little bit what we're doing here. Okay, so we can, and we're going to have like 3 rows here. So, and then I'm thinking in these rows, then we're going to have a grid cell inside here. I'm thinking of the best way to do this as well. As, I mean, we could go and do, cells in here as well. So I'm thinking, do we want to do, let's again, maybe we'll start. I mean, this might actually be, to use dynamic or to use more appropriate tags. Maybe this could be a section, but again, maybe I'll go back and refactor that. But for right now, I think I'm just going to go like this and do, excuse me, cells. There we go. Cell for each grid row. So this is going to kind of give us a basic outline here for how this is gonna look. And maybe to just really quickly make sure this looks like what we want, we can do a CSS selector here for cell 1px solid black. Oh, that's not working how we want it to be. Oops. Let's see, for the, we should be able to do data component. Let's just say like width. A little bigger height. And then our cells, maybe we need to have these, give these like a width of 20 pixels each. Okay. I'm not sure what's going on here with why these are being, it's probably something, okay. Okay. Okay, great. So we do have our cells here. Make these a little bigger, maybe. Okay, and so to make these into a grid, typically I like to use like a, I mean, we can use literally a grid, or we can use like a flexbox type of solution here. It's been a minute since I've used grid. So let me see here. This could be, this maybe makes more sense to be like row 1, row 2, and then row 3. We can do like a display flex here. Although I'm not sure that that's going to actually give us exactly what we want. Okay, so I think I think for styling it out this way, it does probably make more sense to use a display grid. Sure,
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember here exactly how we, so for like row 1, I think if I'm remembering right, it's like you use a display grid and then you use like a grid area. And then, man, I'm trying to remember. I think you do it kind of like this. Tell me if you, if this looks wrong, but oops. And then I think you do like row, oh, let's see, grid area, or it's grid template areas, I think maybe is what it is, where you go like this, and then you do like row 1, row 1, row 1. Okay, this is starting to make me feel a little better. And then you, on the next line, would do like row, oh, it doesn't like that I'm doing that. Row, why is it doing this? I believe with grid template areas, you make it kind of like this. Here we go. Maybe that's liking that more. My formatting can be a little better. Row. I swear you can just hit the enter here and should be able to do row. Oh, here we go. Row 2. Yeah, row 2. Row 2. And then let's see, row 3, row 3, row 3. I'm not sure why it's not liking this, other than maybe it wants it to start on this. Is there something small that you're seeing that or am I going about this in a pretty and not a great way?
So I think this almost works. I think you'll I think the best way to go about this, it's fine if you need to look anything up. So if you wanted to look up the documentation and try to suss this out yourself, I think that would be best.
Just really quick. So let's look at maybe W3 schools. I might have a quick example here. Let's just search template areas. Template areas. Display grid template areas. But I'm not seeing where it's telling me about like multiple lines here. Because I do remember this, because this means extra spaces. Display grid. I'm gonna maybe sometimes MDN is better. So okay, so it looks like I was trying to do something pretty similar here. So let's take a look and see if my formatting was just weird like that. So it looked like it wanted like this, like this, like that. Okay, so now we kind of have this grid. Obviously, this is not how we want it to look. And then we can do like, let's see, to be able to, let's see. So we have our grid template areas. So that was good. It might be like a margin 0. I think maybe we'll make those. Nope. Or let's see. Oh, we're right here in the whole grid. So on the cells, we maybe want to do like a margin 0 or padding 0 because we're between. I'm not sure. Let's look at it. Let me see. Grid gap property. That's probably what's going on here, I'm guessing. So grid gap. Or is that a none? I should have looked that up while I was grid gap. Default value is 0. CSS syntax, grid row gap. I'm not sure why that is showing up as it is. Oops, I've got like a grid gap 20 pixels, 0 pixels. So I wonder if I put in like 0 pixels here. So that's not, well, it's not looking like what we want here. Okay. At any rate, I'm not sure why our grid gap is showing showing up here. But I think in the interest of time, being that the functionality is probably more important than the style here, I probably want to move on and maybe come back to this if that sounds all right.
That sounds totally fine to me. Take note that you can also use the inspect tool if that would be helpful.
Okay. Like yeah. So let's see. So here we have obviously our body here. Let's get to our grid. Yeah, see, so that is different than what I would have expected.
Yeah, so that there is no grid gap currently.
There is no grid gap. Yeah, you're totally right here. So grid template areas, row 1, row 1, row 1. That is, okay. Interesting. So that is where our problem is. I might have made some mistakes here. I wonder if this would have, no, we still want to do like some styling here. Okay, so my understanding of grid template areas was it does like the columns and the rows for you. I'm wondering, so this is on the grid overall. And so it's probably something to do here with, so I have row 1, row 2, and row 3 in our grid. And so it's doing it for that. But maybe because I have, okay, so it's doing it for grid 1. So it's grid 1, row 1, row 2, row 3. But I think because we don't have, I wonder, so I'm gonna see if this actually fixes it and we just have our cells. So we just have all these cells now. That would obviously change because we're using our row 1, row 2, row 3. Does this seem like what may be going on is these divs might have been throwing us off here? Let's take a look at the inspector again.
I think it's possible. I would say it's also probably still fine to move on to the JavaScript portion and come back to this.
Okay, gotcha. I think I agree with you as well. Okay, so we have these grids. Let's now create here our other component, which is the controller. So I'm going to just use another div here. I'm going to use data component tag as well. And let's call this a controller, since that's what it looks like to me. It looks like a little controller. So for the controller here, this one is maybe, so we've got like this outer container here, and then maybe like an inner container with the arrows in it. So I'm going to create an inner container. And then we'll give this a, let's see. And then, so in this inner container, maybe we have like a different, like for arrows, maybe we can use like p tags for that. Right now, let's just go like this, and then we can go in and left. And then, so we kind of have this controller again, like I'm going to try to move on to this functionality here, but kind of how it is now, there'd be a click listener on the up, the right, the down, and the left. And so when you click these, you should be able to move across these very not well designed cells right now. So okay, so getting over to, I think I'm going to jump over to the JavaScript here. I'm going to close my CSS here. Let's get rid of this because I don't think this looks important. So
sounds good. To interrupt for a second, just a heads up, we're about halfway done with our coding time.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's try to get some important stuff done here. So what I think I want to do right here is create like a class here for let's start with like our controller. And the controller, when we create it with our constructor function, it's going to take in a node. And then I think what we want to do here is essentially have this like take care of our like handle click functionality. Sorry, not in the constructor specifically, but in this class. Thinking that might work. Although, since we're not going to be creating multiple controllers, this I'm actually going to think maybe not needed for that. Instead, what we can just do is we can let's simplify it, and then we can see. So we have our data component controller here. So I'm going to say, let's grab that controller node. Is going to be let's get it with a query selector, and then we can do data. Excuse me. Let's go like this. We can use data component equals controller. So this should give us access to our controller node here. And then really what we need is the click handlers that will be associated with the up, right, and the left and the down here. So again, kind of what we need to do for these is we need to know where we're at in the grid to start. So figure out where we are in the grid. If we can have like an out of bounds, check if out of bounds. If out of bounds, do nothing. In bounds, we want to then check direction. And then again, like remove list, remove selector and add selector to appropriate cell. So to get the selected cell, we could do something like we can do another query selector, and we can do query selector with a class, and it'll just give us the first one. And we'll have like a class that we'll add called selected. So this will be our cell node that corresponds with one of these cells up here. And when we have that, at that point, let's see. Okay, so we have our selected cell node, and that would be red. And then what we do is we have a handle click, which is like a listener, which, or excuse me, is going to be attached to our buttons here. So we have our selected cell node, we have our controller node. When we have our controller nodes, we now need to grab like, well, let's do the functionality and then we'll connect it to them. So at this point, it might make sense to add classes to these as well, like up. So we can just more easily select them from here. So right, down, and left. Okay, so we have up, right, down, and left, and our handle click. Okay, so maybe our handle click takes in we can maybe do like so on here we'll have our handle click can take in like an event, and this will give us access to which of these buttons we're clicking. So on this one, so again, we can figure out where we are in the grid. So I think if we're to figure out where we are in the grid, we have our selected node here. I'm thinking about how we're going to, let's see, how we're going to select each of these. So if we click on the right button, for example, and we're in the top left, we remove the selected listener from so we do like, let's see, maybe doing this selected node this way doesn't make as much sense as I thought originally. So we could do the, let's see, selected node. I mean, we're probably going to have to do like, it's kind of like, one thing is this grid is like essentially like a 2D array. So maybe what we can do actually is, I'm thinking about this, is maybe like what makes more sense is like creating or grabbing all of our cells, like looking at it as a 2D array, and moving like like indexes I for left, right, and J for up, down. And so we can, maybe the best way to do that is cells equals document dot query selector. This way, this time we'd use a query selector all, and we can just use the dot cell here, since that's what we have on all of our cells to give us our cells. So this way we have like all of our cells, and in our handle click, we can find our selected. What we can do is iterate over our cells to move like which way they go, left and right. Does this sound like a better solution potentially than, or does this sound like something in your opinion that might be a good way to go with?
I think that makes sense. Can you run it by me one more time?
So yes. So I'm thinking in so we're looking at our grid here, and like when we click like the right, for example, we want to move right, down. Mm-hmm. And so if we get all of our cells and kind of, this would give us like an array of all of the nodes here. And so we can kind of, I'm wondering if maybe one way to do this would be to create like a 2D array where we have like an array of arrays where this is the first 3 nodes, this is the second 3 nodes, this is the last 3 nodes. And then we change our selected based on like, hey, go I plus 1. And when we click right and add the selected to that cell node, or go J plus 1, right?
Yeah, I think using an actual data structure in JavaScript to represent this seems like a totally viable solution, and one that would save a possible headache.
Okay, great. So we have all of our cells here. So now the next step would be to divide them up into that grid sort of, or that's 2D array. So one way we could do that is, I mean, just maybe, so one reason query selector all is great is because it actually gives us an iterable list. So we could do like, let first row equal cells dot slice from the 0 to the 4, because its slice is not inclusive, so we have to do one more. So this should give us the slice gives us a copy, so we're not going to we should be ruining this either. Second row cells dot slice from the 3 to the 6, again non-inclusive, and then let third row equal cells dot slice. And we don't, maybe it's fine. So this is 0, 1. Oh, this should actually be, sorry, since we're 0 indexed, 0, 1, 2, and this one is 3, 4, 5. So 3 to the 6, and then 6, 7, 8. And we can just do from the 6 to the, and then we should need to give it it'll just go to the end when we don't give it a second parameter. And then we have, okay, so we have our first row, our second row, and our third row. So you can have our cells grid be an array of, and we can maybe have it look a little nicer. So first row, second row, third row. So this is kind of what I'm imagining here.
Totally makes sense.
And so this way we should be able to iterate over these things and add our selector to them. So one thing I should have asked by the beginning too is this default selected is the top left one, or is it nothing selected?
The default is the top left selected.
Okay, great. So okay, so let's again, that maybe we can add this to our, we can also say this one is selected, since this is going to be our top left one. So if that's selected, maybe real quick, we can say background color. I know this is not, I would get obviously a RGB, or like I'd actually get the hex or the RGB
Totally
for it.
Yeah.
But for right now, this probably is, especially given the time that we have. Okay, so at least looks like we're selecting the right thing. So that's looks good. So what, again, like the next part of this is we have these grids. Okay, and so this stuff, I'm wondering if it maybe just can go up here. So we have access to like kind of our state here of our cells grid. Handle click is going to take in, so this one can be like if, so we have upright left down, if e dot, I think we should be able to do target dot class list dot contains up, like, then we can like up, oops. Then we can do move up. Come on. And maybe we could use like a switch statement or something for this too, but again, we could refactor that in a minute. So target dot class list, right? So essentially, this is like, hey, which button is it? Okay, so that's kind of the next iteration of, or the next step, I guess, in what I'm thinking is, okay, like which button is this? If it's the right button here, then we'll move it. Let's go with the right here, since that's maybe the easiest functionality to kind of figure out. And again, we'd have to figure out like, is this in bounds first of all? But let's figure this out. Typically, it might be good to figure out just our movements here. So, okay. Doing this, if we're in a 2D grid, we're gonna be iterating over. So we need to be able to find like which cell. So we need to iterate over and grab the so in order to do this, I think we need to find the actual index of the cell nodes that is selected. So what we could do here, we have our document.query selector, or sorry, our dot selected here. So like currently, one way to think of this is like our state. The state of our grid is 0, like the state of our grid here is like the selected is 0, 0. So like state is 0, 0 in our grid. Selected state starts as 0, 0 in our grid. Okay, so I'm wondering, I'm thinking like one way we could do this is, okay, so if we click right, we increment I, and then we can select the row out of our cells that's at that one and add the dot selected to it. So maybe we can do this again. There are many things I'm seeing that would probably be better than what this, but like how I've kind of gone about this, but let selected state, and this maybe going back would have been better to do inside of a class now that I'm thinking of it, but this is kind of what I'm thinking would have worked well is selected state starts out at 0, 0. If we move right, then it would be like selected state at 1 like plus or something, so that and then we would so then we have to update the selected. So then I don't know, let's see. So it'd be like, okay, so we have our selected state. This would then theoretically be 0, 1. And then we could say like cell, let's see, cells at gosh, I think I am, let me think about this again really quick. So if we have our selected state, it's 0, 0, we update our, we're saying, hey, move this one up 1. So now we're 0, 1, and we need our cells grid. So it'd be like maybe grabbing, so cells grid, oh man, this is not, I don't think this is the best way to do this, but selected state 0, 0. We increment at 1, and then we need to find the selected, the new cell to select. And that would be like, for example, cells grid at selected state at 0, selected state at 1. Again, I realize this probably isn't looking great, but cells grid selected state at 0, selected state at 1. Say here, I mean, obviously we have a ton of stuff that is, let's see, let cell to select equals cells grid at 0, cells grid at 0 is going to give us first row, and at 0 is going to give us the first cell in that. So if we increase our selected state, which is our first one here, that's our sorry, I think this is actually cell state at 0 plus plus, because it's going to go, no, I think that's right, at 1, because the first one is going to go down, and then it's the second one goes right. So selected state at 1 plus plus. So cell to select, our cells grid at 0 0. So cells grid, then we reset our cell to select to be cells grid. And then we can do like cell to select dot. Well, when we first hit this, it's going to be a handle click, which first we would check if it's in bounds, and then we would do like, if it is in bounds, then we would say something like cells, like cells grid. Well, first, okay, so our default cell to select is that. So we would do like, cell to select dot class list dot remove selected. So that would like get rid of it. And then here we're saying, hey, we've clicked right. So at this piece of the state moving to the right, cell to select now changes dot class list. So this would refer to a cell node, right? So we should be able to have class list dot add selected. I realize we're now at 150. So obvious. I don't know if this is a good time to go over feedback.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to call it here. But yeah, I'm happy to go over some initial feedback here. So first off, congrats on getting an interview. You know, always a difficult experience, and especially in this one, because this interview is definitely a lot of talking, a lot to explain here. So great job on that. I'll start by just going over some of the positives and then go into some of the things afterwards I think you could work on. So some of the things that I thought went really well in this interview. One, I really like that you gave an initial layout of the problem. I think, especially with these kinds of interviews, you know, the ones that aren't just straight, you know, leak code problems, essentially, people often don't do that kind of initial layout work. And that can get them in a lot of trouble when they're, you know, not quite sure how, what direction things are going to go in. So they spend, you know, a lot of time on one thing and then don't have the realization that they need to move on, or just don't, you know, go into the problem blindly without really having a plan. So really like that you had a good sort of initial setup there. The approach of using data components definitely is good. Obviously, it's a small difference between using the data component or using something like an ID or a class, but I find that using data components definitely helps keep track of things and label them correctly. So really like that. Overall, your explanations were really good. I felt very kept in the loop with what you were doing, which was nice. I didn't have to probe too much to get you to explain your thought process and a lot of things. So that was definitely good. You managed to keep that up pretty well. And also the amount of nervousness that at least I perceived you having was pretty low. I would say there was a little bit of nerves probably in the last 10 minutes or so. But for the rest of the time, you seemed pretty calm and collected and were able to work through it without too much of that getting in the way, which is also a huge plus. So those were kind of the things that I thought went well. Some things I think you could work on. Obviously, there was just the general CSS setup with the grid areas. I personally find the Flexbox solution a little bit easier to work through here. But both with grid and Flexbox, it's kind of a game of already having the knowledge you need. And especially with the grid, it ends up being a little bit difficult to work with. So I would say that's just probably more so. I would study Flexboxes first, just because those tend to come up in a lot of other interview types, I would say, especially, you know, front end interviews where they're more just asking you general questions about front end. The go-to gotcha questions, a lot of them are about CSS and about Flexboxes. So I would look into that, as well as probably looking into the grid approach. As far as the JavaScript, you actually had a really good implementation. I think you kind of just got there with not enough time. If I were to scope out how much time I would spend on this problem, I probably would have tried to move on from the styling after about 15 minutes, and we ended up moving on after about 26 or 27. And then there just really wasn't enough time to fully implement the JavaScript. I would say that in the last 10 minutes, the little bit of nerves that I was talking about did seem to get to you a little bit. I think you made the state selecting a lot more complicated than it needed to be. Because I do think your approach of using a query selector to get all of the cells and then put them into a 2D array is a perfect solution. I think you just tripped yourself up by having the selected state also be an array instead of, an I and a J. And then you didn't really write a helper function, which I think having a helper function that essentially takes in, I or J and changes the state appropriately, and then also, finds the appropriate cell and updates it. That would have been a lot simpler to think about, because I think you were even getting tripped up on just like, how do I take the selected state object and then translate that into the right position in the cells grid? And yeah, and then one more small nit. You did ask about the default selected, whether that was going to be in the left or off the grid, but that is something I mentioned when I was explaining the prompt initially. So
yeah, I do remember that as I was asking it.
not a huge deal, but just some interviewers might care a lot.
So that's good advice.
Yeah, that was about all the initial feedback I had, at least. So if you had any questions for me, now's the time.
Yeah, so I do have a couple questions. So great, this is great feedback. You mentioned getting to this, the meat of the problem a little bit earlier. In terms of like questions like this, do you care if, like, I know I originally, and this is in some of the Interview Kickstart curriculum, they really emphasize using classes. Do you as an interviewer care, like, how much do you care about following this process of like, okay, like, let's create classes and then maybe we have less stuff in the global scope, or is really just getting, or is the important thing to you getting to this, hey, here's my solution that I think will work in my mind and I just need to figure it out? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes sense. Yeah, so I actually don't have 100% context for this. Weirdly enough, I teach the class. I teach the module, the front end module of the full stack development course, but I haven't touched the front end development course at all. But I have had this question raised before, and my opinion on it is that based on what I've seen of the sort of class-based approach that IK encourages, I think it makes a lot of sense, but only for the right type of problem. And I think for other problems, it tends to be overcomplicated. I think if you have the difference for me, I think, is if you can kind of class the problems as either sort of very hierarchical problems and less hierarchical problems. And what I mean by that is if you have lots of sort of nested components you're going to be working with, then classes simplify that dramatically. One of the questions that I would ask, not in this, but in a system design, is something like building a Facebook news feed where you would have, a broad feed component, and then that feed component would have post components, and then the post components would have profile components and text components and an image component and a comments component. So if you get asked a question that has a lot of moving parts to it and a lot of nesting of components, that's the part where I feel like classes really shine. But for this, there's really only, at most there is one layer of nesting here, where the grid has cells or the grid has arrows. And in that case, I think the more just I have a data object and it represents everything. approach is a lot simpler.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And that is very good to know. Okay. I had some questions written down. Let me see if I can find those. Okay. So yeah. So, and in terms of like, so if we're not, so in terms of like laying out the HTML, do you care how much of this is like generated in JavaScript as well? Or like if you see something like this where a lot of it's out in the HTML, are you like, oh, is this any sort of red flag to you versus generating it over here?
No, I don't care.
Okay.
I think so. Code styling in general, I would say this is true across all interview types. I give data structures interviews too. It's true for that. It's true for this. Code styling is graded, but very lightly.
Oh, that's interesting to know.
Really, it's not. I would say it's very rare that I get either someone who has such bad code styling that I mark them down for it, or such good styling that I mark them up for it. It looks it's slightly flashier, I would say, if you're able to, dynamically generate all of those cells. But it's not really expected. And I still, for the average candidate, I would probably end up giving them the same, 3 out of 4 on code style score. I would say that it really doesn't count for. It's one of the, I would say code styling is one of the things that can like be brought together with other things like, how quickly you solve the problem and how much you have to say about it and how good your explanations are. It's one of those things that like, maybe if you have really good code style, it helps you go from a weak hire to a strong hire. But if you solve the problem, unless your code is like completely unreadable, I'm not going to be like, no, I can't recommend this person. Their code was too messy.
Okay. I know we're about out of time, but if you have time, I have one more general question.
Yeah.
So I'm looking, eventually to be applying to, front end positions, mostly at, higher tier companies.
Makes sense.
And so I've heard, just from other friends that I have, and even from other people, varying things. So in the interviewing process, my question is, where am I going to get like mileage out of that curriculum? Like, for example, do I need to spend a lot of time on graphs and a lot of time on system design type questions as well? And keeping in mind, I have, 2 years of experience so I don't know exactly if that puts me in recruiters' range of like maybe a mid or an entry, or if that's, like we could consider him for senior if he does well. All things considered, like where's my time going to be really best spent on the curriculum? And is there anything that really I should not need to focus on for now?
Yeah, so I think you can break it down into just percentages. So how I would break this down for the front end engineers is that probably 30% of your time should be spent on sort of your domain specific interviews. So I would say kind of that's prepping for everything that would be labeled as a front end interview, which admittedly is a lot of different things. Because that could be like this, a proper sit down coding interview. It could be sort of an interview style interview where they're asking you, tell me about the most recent features in your favorite framework, or tell me about how flex boxes work in CSS, or, questions like that, where it's more of a conversation, as well as take home projects, which are also a popular way of interviewing front end candidates. I would say all of those together, 30% of your interview prep time. I would say another 30% is the behavioral. I think candidates should take a behavioral interview very seriously, and spend roughly an equal amount of time in some sense prepping for that. Getting the stories you're going to say in place, getting all of your experience up to date. And then I would say probably 25%, like a little bit less than those two, should be practicing for front-end system design. So front-end system design is kind of it's a more nebulous category than system design. If you look for it, you're going to find a couple resources that'll have it. But essentially, that's kind of thinking about how you're going to it's the closest interview to doing the job of a front-end developer, where instead of back-end system design, where you'd be focusing on databases, services, things like that, you're going to be focusing more on things like component architecture or website optimization, or just generally kind of how you would design a front-end system, knowing that there's a back-end that'll support you. And then the last 15%, I would say you can spend on data structures. Really, the data structures are, if you can get some kind of info, probably just talking to people who work at the company about whether they ask front-end engineers data structures questions, then you can target that more. I would say the 15% of your time is a good cover if you're just trying to apply to every company. But obviously, if you find a specific goal company and you find out they don't ask front-end engineers data structures question, then you can just skip it entirely.
Okay, gotcha. And in terms of the data structures, I'm assuming like for front-end stuff, you'd probably get more like maybe trees and recursion type problems.
I would treat it exactly the same as if you were a backend engineer. I think if they are the kind of company to be asking the front-end engineers data structures questions, anything's fair game. I think it's exactly the same, where it'll be using whatever language of your choice, any of a arrays question, string question, data structures question, graphs, trees, dynamic programming. It really could be any of them.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that is good to know. And one more just follow-up question on this. The 30% domain-specific interviews, this type of interview would fall under that as well, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
Create I got another one that was like create a table that, it changes on hover and sorts on click, stuff like that. So that this fits into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that is super helpful.
Email me if you have any more questions, either about this interview or the process as a whole. And I'll try to get your feedback for this interview within the next day or so. So
awesome. Thank you.